What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. Warren, you were just saying it's okay to pause and take your breath and, collect your thoughts. And then I just hit the go live button. And I was like, oh, what am I supposed to do? So I just blurt everything out there. But hey, Warren, how are you?
Good life strategy, really.
Right?
Working so far. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm Warren, CTO at Authoress. Thanks for having me back, Will. Again, I can't help but notice your name, Will, the SaaS button. I feel like there may be some punctuation
Oh my
missing there.
gosh. How convenient is that? I didn't even put that together because joining us today is Michael Zuercher from Prismatic. You're the CEO and co-founder of Prismatic, which is focused on SaaS integrations, right?
That is right. Thanks for having me.
Dude, what a coincidence.
What a
That's
coincidence.
amazing. So I'm going to start off with a really cool fact that I know about you that I
Well,
just,
now I'm terrified to hear this. So
right? Right. Because we are live. And no, I'm serious. I looked you up on LinkedIn and I saw that you live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Is that correct?
I do. That's
That is
correct.
so cool. Like Sioux Falls is such a cool area, but also like a really interesting place to have a tech-oriented company, I think.
Right.
But I don't know anything about the community itself, just the landscape
No,
in the
you're
area.
you are right. It is not exactly a historical tech mecca. That is for sure. I built my last company here, and so you have a pretty decent sized network from that company, which got to scale, and I exited a while back, and so that's where we started this company. We're fully remote at this point, so
Right.
most of us aren't in Sioux Falls, but I am, I guess. So I guess we can claim it to some extent.
That's cool. On kind of a tangent there, do you find yourself, and I ask this because I'm in a similar situation where I live in a really small rural agricultural town. I think I might be the only tech-oriented person in the town. Do you
Yeah.
find yourself talking with like younger people in the community who are interested in getting a path in technology, like software engineering or anything?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's probably everywhere, but certainly Sioux Falls, there's certainly a ton of interest in technical fields, and we have a handful of scaled tech companies here. There's a autonomous tractor company doing really cool things called Raven, and some some cool businesses. So there's certainly plenty of like interest. But I think what's so interesting about where things have gone is that you could live here and work for anybody out of anywhere, and I think
Right.
that's more true in tech fields, specifically developers, etc., than probably anywhere else. And so I think that really changes that dynamic, that you can decouple your career choice from your choice of where to live.
For sure. Yeah. And that's a very recent change. Like it certainly
Yes.
wasn't true when I started my career in the 90s. And then it sort of gained traction. And then, COVID, of course, I think was really like the
Yep.
thing that opened up that as a long-term possibility.
Yeah, I mean we've been creeping that direction, and then COVID fast forwarded us a couple of decades or something, and just by proving it can be done. And I
Yeah.
don't think the tech sector's broadly likely to go back. I mean, I know specific firms are doing whatever they're doing, but like I think from a big picture perspective, the cat is out of the bag.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Agreed. So let's talk about SaaS's software as a solution. I would imagine everyone's had some experience with them. And like
Sure.
the big problem, I think the one that you have focused on addressing is integrating with all of these different SaaSes, because there's a kind of like this theme in software development right now where a good portion of your application is likely powered by bringing multiple SaaS
Yeah.
vendors together to provide some of your back end. Would you say it's a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. I think it all stems from the customer need.
Yeah.
Any software as a service, any SaaS company is delivering some domain specific thing to some customer, and I think increasingly for a lot of reasons, those customers just expect that whatever solution's being delivered is just in this like magical web where everything talks to everything else, right? This like fully connected graph. And I think that's kind of been like creeping toward true for a long time. But I think we've seen it happen in certain spaces and in consumer tech, for example. And those expectations have broadened to the SMB space in B2B, the enterprise space even in B2B. And I think there's just more and more expectation that every point solution, every system of record just kind of like magically talks to each other. And at the end of the day, guess where that burden got put? It got put on SaaS companies, on software vendors, and there are pros and cons to that. Whatever, we're not here to debate that. The fact is, that's what customers want, and so there are a lot of ways to skin that cat, but somehow or another, you have to deliver that to your customer to stay competitive.
There's an argument that the connecting of these integrations is the core value that businesses today are bringing, and that you can't be competitive by building something. You got to find the pieces out there. I mean, everything's been done before already for the most part, right? So the only value left is connecting them in interesting ways. And that's sort of like internal, right? In ways customers don't necessarily see. But then there's, of course, the external kind as well, where they're bringing their own sort of expectations on what their own system is using and wanting to play ball with that.
Yeah, I think there are kind of two factors. I think the first is exactly what you said, that like for a lot of solutions, a huge portion of the value is in their ability to connect other things. Secondly, I think customers are less and less willing to build those integrations themselves. It used to be that in the small end of the market, you'd use Zapier. In the big end of the market, you'd use MuleSoft, and then everything in between. And if you're a big business, you have some IT group to do it. If you're a small business, maybe you're the one who connects things. But like that expectation was always put on customers. And I think customers are just backing away from being willing to accept that to some extent, and saying like, hey, you're the software people, go make it work. And, and I think as a result, we're just seeing this huge trend or this huge just expectation of native integrations.
I think it may be a pendulum swing the other way too, where sales is saying, hey, of course we have integration with XYZ other software. And then you turn around and be like, oh, we don't actually have that. What's the easiest way? Do we hire a team in some other country to build it for us? Or, oh, there's an automated solution that, will come in and just connect this up for us. We don't even need an engineering department to make that happen.
Yeah, what I hear a lot is very similar, but it's often through the lens of like a product manager where they're saying, I'm looking at our roadmap or looking at our pipeline of deals over the next X number of months, and some percentage of them include integrations that we don't have today. And so the way I can unlock this pipeline as a product manager or an executive or whatever is to figure out, as you said, like how do we get there? And to a large extent, most SaaS companies don't really care how to get there. They just need to get there in a reliable way that's actually tractable. And I think that has people looking at a lot of different ways of doing it right now.
Yeah, especially the ones that are VC funded, where speed is the only important
speed. Yeah, that is right.
I think there's an interesting abstraction there. Like when you're writing code, hands on the keyboard, part of the value that SaaS applications add is don't build something that is not unique to your product. If somebody else has already built it, just buy that and focus on your core business. And I think making one SaaS talk to another is an extension of that. Like there's no need to have 10,000 people writing a Salesforce to Google Drive integration. Let's let those two guys go and battle it out. Or is that where you come in as Prismatic? Is that where like your value add to the whole transaction?
Yeah. So, we are Prismatic is used by a SaaS company, whether that SaaS company is kind of on either end of that connection, whether you're the system of record that everybody's connecting to, or whether you're a point solution connecting to the system of record, which is often kind of the dynamic in a B2B environment. Regardless, we are a tool that can be embedded into a SaaS to make it as easy as possible to make those connections. And the way that we always think about it is, like you said, there's no reason for everybody to reinvent the wheel of the 80% of this that is the same no matter which industry or which domain you're in. Like, why in the world should every software company go rebuild the way to scale integrations, log integrations, secure integrations? I mean, the list goes on and on. Instead, we want folks to focus as much as possible on the things that are actually unique in a domain. because a software company that sells software to ag tech is going to know tons and tons and tons about ag tech. Ideally, they would put all of their effort, all of their energy into the things that are unique to that, because that's their deep experience, their deep domain knowledge. That doesn't include, as it turns out, building yet another way to stand up an elk stack to log integrations and some of the unique things related to it, right? And so, like, I think wherever you can shove it, into an ecosystem, the better. That doesn't mean you can just offload your integrations completely, because it turns out integrations have a lot to do with the domain. But it does mean you can offload the infrastructure, the scaffolding, the tooling that it takes to go build the domain-specific integration stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want to derail this, but I'm glad you brought up ag tech, because my nephew is a farmer, and the amount of technology involved in farming, like I hang out with him sometimes, and he shows me like, oh yeah, this is our tractor and it's got GPS and it tracks how far, and it tracks where the next row of onions should be. And that's like, I'm just completely geeking out over this. Yeah. Because you think of farming and I don't think of farming as being like a high tech industry, but it kind of is these days.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think as we squeezed all the efficiency we can out of it, it's gotten bizarrely tech enabled in the best possible way. There's some amazing things happening in ag tech today.
Yeah, it's like the tractor tracks how many times you've lifted and lowered the bucket, and when you hit the maintenance threshold, it sends an SMS message out to the dealer, and some guy shows up and say it's maintenance time for your tractor. You're like, yeah, okay,
fair enough.
Right? I guess so.
I'm always amazed when I see it, honestly. I mean, just the automation in the industry really does remind me of some sort of computer game, Sims or Farmville or something like that. It's just like, it literally seems like that from a, owner perspective. The number of actual people on staff at a farm is incredibly minimal.
Yep.
It's farming simulator IRL.
Yeah. We just connected it to the real world somehow, and now there's iron driving around out there.
You make it a game, and someone will pay actually to do that job,
That's right. They'll pay to drive your tractors for you.
For sure.
It might be hard on your fence lines, but they'll pay to do it.
Right.
There's a new business here. I'm sure of it. Just, make the right interface, right? And chat dialogue on the right-hand side. It's just, you got a gold in there.
I love it.
I am curious about what the actual interface is for, say, Prismatic or some of the other ones that you're actually integrating into your system. Is it providing APIs that are somehow ubiquitous, or everything goes into Prismatic and there's some configuration there that has it redirected to the right integration and whatnot? If you give me a good picture of that, I'm sure people are interested.
Yeah. So, we see a couple of different pieces of this equation. If you think about, hey, I'm a SaaS company and I need to deliver native integrations to my customers in whatever industry they're in. The first is you have to somehow have the infrastructure to actually run those integrations. As you probably are aware, like, integrations have kind of unique burstiness problems because of the nature of what they are. They're often scheduled to run every 15 minutes or at the top of the hour or at midnight. And so, like, the first piece of Prismatic or something like it is just the infrastructure to run this stuff. And that includes security. And it's one of those things that, like, the deeper you dig, the more you realize there's a lot to doing it well. And then on top of that, you have to have a way to actually construct these integrations. And if an integration is, a bunch of business logic that is domain specific to what this integration needs to do, then you have to have ways to specify that. And at Prismatic, we take the view that there are two distinct and both completely valid ways to do it. One is by actually writing code, which in Prismatic land is just TypeScript using an SDK of ours that lets you, kind of write the actual business logic pieces, but none of the stuff around it, right? Like, you want to just be contained to the part that's actually business logic, actually domain specific. So code native is what we call that path, and we see that as, just a natural way for software companies to do some things. Then the other path is low code, which is the natural path for software companies to do some things, depending on kind of which people inside of a software business are the closest to the domain-specific stuff and are the ones who should be building and specifying these integrations. And so we see those as basically equal but different paths to build the integration that can then run on top of that infrastructure that I talked about before. So what that gets you is a platform that can run integrations, monitor integrations, introspect integrations, alert on integrations, all of that stuff. Then the third piece of all of this is what we call the marketplace, which is a actual like UX that you can put in your app. This is the only thing that our customers will see. And it's the ability for, to have a little like, hey, here's your marketplace of all the integrations we offer. Go click connect on Google Drive or on, Acme ERP or whatever, put in your credentials and it'll turn on. And that's another one of those things that like, I don't care which industry you're in, that looks substantially similar everywhere. It doesn't make sense for everybody to reinvent that. The same way it doesn't make sense for everybody to reinvent authentication screens, for example. And so, Warren, to your ongoing concern, but we provide that such that it can be put into embedded inside of SaaS tools, and between those three components and all the things that support them, you have a pretty full-featured way to provide native integrations.
No, I totally get the perspective here. I think our customers are similar, right? They want some of them for sure want the full integrated experience, hands off. Like they don't even care if their users see our interface for stuff. But then there are for sure the other ones that are like, we don't like what you did. We want to customize exactly how we want. I always hope that there's some sort of middle ground here where the configuration makes sense, but then there is this sort of weird fine line of that's too specific for what we need. We need the code first approach for sure to make it happen. I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we think a lot about the integration platform space. It originated and most of the classic iPaaS space, which is integration platform as a service. The classic iPaaS space sells to IT groups generally, sells to businesses for use internally inside that business. And if that is your goal, if that's what you're doing, then you're going to have a certain outcome around, low code is the thing that makes sense because we're dealing with, IT teams, et cetera, et cetera. But if instead you're in the space that Prismatic is in, which is called embedded iPaaS and is a new category, and you are selling exclusively to SaaS companies or to software companies, you come to a pretty different conclusion on the kinds of tools that are going to enable them best. And sure, low code is part of it, but every developer ever who has touched anything related to low code is terrified of painting themselves into a corner and being stuck on the last 5%, right? Hey, it was really easy for the first 95%, and then it was impossible for the last 5%, and guess what? That rounds to 0. Now I'm going to just build it myself. And so, the way we always thought about this is like, if you're selling to SaaS businesses, if SaaS businesses are who you're serving, then you got to always have an escape hatch. And about the best escape hatch is straight down to TypeScript, right? Like just let them pull the ripcord and write TypeScript where they need to. And that has served us very, very well, and I think has worked very well for our customers.
Yeah, I've definitely seen the concerns over the low code interfaces for a lot of things. I mean, even at the app level, they're out there. But yeah, like you said, if you don't know what you're doing, they're great. But if you're anyone who has any experience, say, writing an integration, using anything else that promises only low code and doesn't give you those options, it just becomes a huge burden at some point when you realize, hey, our business logic has requirements here, and I need to do a thing, and there's no documentation or no expectations about how that actually works for real in practice. But with like an SDK, that's like a huge advantage.
Yeah, and what we see really, what we've seen be really successful is businesses, customers of ours that will use developers to essentially build like low code extensions or low code blocks that can then be used by other folks in their organization. And so you kind of have this thing where like developers can be the leverage to make the low code tool form to the business or form to the industry. And then you can use other people inside the business to build the, whether it's a custom specific integration or maybe you just need to build 100 because you're in an integration heavy space. My last business built 600 integrations in the public safety space, which is law enforcement and 911 centers. So like the way Prismatic came to be is that my co-founders and myself I was there for 16 years beating my head against this integration wall and came out of it and said like, dang it, we're just going to go build the thing that we always wished we had. So if you're in a space like that, you probably don't want developers to build 600 integrations. You want developers to build a set of tools, in my now biased view on top of Prismatic. But like regardless of how you get there, somehow build a set of tools that enable other people in the organization to go build those 600 domain specific things.
I really love that you're leaning into the marketplace, especially because one of the biggest problems I've had with other low code or even code as a platform tools has been that they care a lot about who their customers are, but they don't pay a lot attention to the success of the marketplace, which you really have to see as a multi-sided marketplace where there's the consumers and the people that are building the code and those building blocks. And if you have a platform that's not attentive to that audience, you will not get high quality building blocks, which means your customers will all suffer. So really an attention there on doing that effectively, good job. Like that's it's not a trivial insight to have, to really focus on that aspect, because they're not your customers, primarily.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because a big chunk of our solution actually serves our customer's customer. And we internally are really careful about talking about customers are our customers' customers and organizations are our customers, because otherwise nobody knows who you actually mean when you say customer, which was one of the first problems that we ran into in this business is, okay, apparently we have to invent a word for this because they're two very different things.
I totally get you 100%. I think it's a general B2B to B problem, or B2B to C. Like it is this thing. We went with, I think, fundamental end user and administrative user for the platform.
Sure, that works too.
User and then end user, and we use that everywhere in our knowledge. But yeah, it's not trivial to explain that.
Yep. Yeah, it took us a little while to get our head wrapped around kind of all the different personas and where they overlap and where they don't, and thankfully that was years ago now, but it was certainly a muddy time.
So I think another one of the problems with building your own integration is keeping up to date. It's one of those things where you build this integration yourself, and then the company you're pulling that data from, they change their API, or they have a new feature, but it's only available in the new API, and you're on 2 versions back. So I'm assuming that y'all have a process where you're continuously working closely with those integration partners and getting updates for when they're releasing new APIs, you're updating it so that in the Prismatic platform, your customers automatically get those updates right away, right?
Yeah, so that's part of what we manage is, on the things that we are in what we call our public component library, meaning those connectors to common third parties. We take responsibility for upgrading those as necessary. And when Salesforce deprecates whatever, then we move things forward. What's interesting kind of around that though, is that, one of the insights we had fairly early on that has proven out is that I don't care how big your library of connectors is, you are never going to have the 30,000 SaaS companies that are in vertical markets in SaaS, and that's just in the United States, much less worldwide. And so many of our customers build connectors that are not connectors that we built. And so, we can build to Salesforce and HubSpot and ServiceNow, and the list goes on, right? But it turns out, I had an early conversation with a customer or prospect, I guess, 4 years ago, where he was in the vertical market. He was from Australia, in the vertical market of liability waiver software for go-karts. Okay, so that is about as narrow of a vertical market as it gets. And it turns out he had competitors who were also in the liability waiver market, right? So what you realize is there are so many vertical markets, and they're getting narrower and narrower and narrower as those solutions get better and better and better. One of the ways they get better is they get more domain specific. And so you now have so many vertical markets that are so narrow that there is no vendor ever on the iPaaS side, embedded iPaaS side, that is going to have every connector you could ever have. And so one of the things that we did, kind of to your point, is build a set of tools so that software companies can build their own connectors in a really nice way. Turns out it's the same set of tools we use to build our public library, but that includes ways to deal with versioning, like you mentioned, where how do I deal with the fact that maybe Salesforce updates to a new API version? I can't just make a change and magically have 3,000 of my customers get that updated. What if there's a problem? What if there's some nuance? What if I have SLAs with enterprise customers that say you can't update our software without notifying us? And so one of the values and one of those sneaky things that people don't think a lot about with integrations until they run into it head first is how do you deploy integrations to 3,000 customers but then manage the rollout to those 3,000 customers in a way that actually serves your customer base, which is going to be different for every SaaS company. And so, like, to your point about versioning, it's true that connectors are versioned, but it's also true that then that causes all kinds of downstream versioning. And we thought pretty deeply about how to handle that. It's never perfect, and I'm not going to say we have a silver bullet because that's just a hard problem. But
For sure.
but certainly we have a lot of tooling around it.
So in your marketplace, you have the connectors that y'all have written, but then you are the ones that other people write also available there, like for the company that has the go-kart liability insurance connector?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that you're right. We build this like library of connectors that we provide and everybody uses and we maintain. And it's kind of the big SaaS apps that you'd expect. I think there's a couple hundred of them at this point in that library, maybe 150. As companies build their own connectors, they generally want to keep those private because they generally see it as a competitive advantage. Okay. If you're that guy in the go-kart market and he goes and builds connectors to whoever he needs to build connectors to, he doesn't want to put them in the library and then turn around and have his competitors get them for free by just like becoming a customer of Prismatic. And so we actually, at this point, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of custom connectors, as we call them, that have been built by our customers that are internal to their environments. And they put them in their own repositories and they put them in their own CI/CD pipelines and they release them to Prismatic as they would any other software, but they're private to them. And it turns out that's what people largely want. Now, that said, if somebody goes and builds something that's common and they're willing to share it, we'll often take that on, and then we'll take on responsibility for maintaining it going forward. And like we've done some of that. But you'd be surprised just how many of these like niche custom connectors there are to systems that I have never heard of and will never hear of again.
Right.
that aren't in the public library because there's a competitive advantage to keeping them private. And I guess to kind of elaborate on the marketplace, the thing that our embedded marketplace allows is for a customer of ours, let's say it's like Acme ERP. It lets Acme ERP deploy to their customers a marketplace that includes some things from us, some things that they built themselves, some integration workflows that they built that are domain specific. And then it just feels like, oh, well, this is the Acme ERP marketplace. It's not the Prismatic marketplace. It's not a generic integration marketplace. This is the Acme ERP marketplace. And there's a huge amount of power in that, like curated, here are the 30 things you actually probably care about, customer.
I got you.
And that's a big part of what Prismatic enables for our customers.
I got you. That makes sense. Yeah. Is Acme ERP a real ERP?
No, making up an ERP. It turns out, here's another thing that I have learned. It turns out there are ERPs for every industry you could possibly imagine. Yeah. There are chiropractic ERPs. There are lawn mowing ERPs. There are, like, the list goes on. And so like and those tend to be the system of record in whichever customer uses that ERP. And so those ERPs tend to either be integrated to a lot or integrate to a lot of other things. And in some ways, in my previous company, we were an ERP for law enforcement to some extent. They didn't call it an ERP, but that's kind of what it was. Right. That's why we had to integrate to so many things, and so many things had to integrate to us. Is we were like the center of this elaborate hub of activity inside of a police department or a 911 center or whatever.
I think, Will, you may have fallen into that. This is good cartoon out there where the characters were attempting to come up with a name for their company and everything was already taken. So you joke. I imagine there is an Acme ERP out there. It
probably is.
I wouldn't be surprised.
We've all of course. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you kept saying it and I was like, dang, that is the coolest ERP name ever.
It's much better than I saw in Microsoft's docs for the longest time, Contoso.com.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I remember as a very early on engineer being like, what is that? Like, is that a real company that they're using as an example? Does Microsoft own? Is that actually what I'm supposed to put in the integration for? I mean, I think it was like authentication at the time. I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, could you not have pulled something? I think we literally use our company name in the example. And I think it's like authorist.yourdomain.com, like wherever it is. Like, there is no question that this is not a real thing.
So way back in the day, this is going to date me, but Microsoft used to use Northwind as the company in all of their examples. So like anybody who was around software in the, I guess it would have been the late 90s or something, early 2000s, it was all like Northwind database, Northwind trading company, Northwind this, Northwind that. And I had the same thing where it's like, okay, tell me about this Northwind because it is ubiquitous somehow. And then it turns out Microsoft just made it up.
I probably still have the Northwind Microsoft Access database.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Because you didn't change the name, when you were installing it the first time. You're like, oh, that's the default. I'm going with that. So like, that's what I'm supposed to name it, right? This field says enter name, and the example says literally Northwind.
Northwind is the name. The doc said it.
Yeah, and there's some point in your career where like you don't have the confidence to change it. You're like, I'm typing Northwind because I don't know where this is going to come back up.
It works in the example, so I'm going to stick with it.
Right.
It definitely turned into the domain name that's going to get used, which ends up other places, and then it becomes an internal company, secret nomenclature for that project.
There you
that
go.
You're working on, Will, right? You keep bringing this up, and I think having built so many integrations in my past life, one of the things that always really bothered me was item potency of dealing with them. And I don't know how much you see this, but I can totally imagine that it's not just the API format or schema, like you mentioned, Will, with the versioning. There is some really gnarly bits when it comes to just things that you would normally expect, even from very large companies, in how their API works. I think item potency and rate limiting are huge ones. Mm-hmm. Any like, secret sauce advice there that's just like, you definitely don't want to think about that?
I mean, I don't know that I have any secret sauce. I think those problems and many others like them are the classic, like everything is easy until you're 6 months into it. Yeah, for sure. Like, I think we all make the problem, developers, engineers, and just like people in general, all make the problem that anything we haven't done ourselves, we just like consider much easier than it actually is. Because what we see is the obvious surface level stuff. And it's like, oh, well, to integrate this and that, it's 2 APIs. I just need like a Lambda in between that talks to those 2 APIs. This is 100 lines of JavaScript and I'm done. And then you realize, as you said, Warren, like item potency and pagination and rate limiting that is sometimes very complex. It's not always like X per second. It's got burst limits and it's got, different limits by time of day. And so I think at Prismatic, what we're essentially doing is just continuing to build scaffolding and tooling that solves those problems in ways that let developers, or what we call technical non-developers, to kind of like use those tools to not have to reinvent the wheel. Now, can I make you not? Can I keep you from having to ever think about item potency and an integration in a B2B SaaS company? Probably not. Can I make tools to make it easier to implement, or make it just like drag that thing on there, say that we want to store the whatever? Yeah, there are all kinds of ways that we can make that easier. And I think that's it's a perfect and classic example of this is all really easy until you're actually in the depths of it, and then you just keep digging and digging and digging until you wish you hadn't started.
If you can make it so that I don't ever have to inspect an HTTP 200 response to see if it's returning an error object instead of getting an HTTP 400 back, that'd be great.
Yeah.
You've worked with one of those.
Yeah, a time or two.
Yeah. And again, there are no silver bullets to these problems, right? Like everybody dreams up their own craziness. We've seen everything you can imagine. A similar vein is the number of ways that OAuth 2 has been bastardized by APIs and by SaaS companies. Like we made a standard, guys. It even has like 4 different standards in the standard. Pick one, but everybody makes up their own stuff. Sometimes they expect an ACK back. Sometimes they expect an ACK back with a certain like hash in it. Like it's insane. And so at this point we have an OAuth 2 implementation that does OAuth 2, but that's 1/20th of what it does. It's all the bastardizations that are the hard part.
I love that you brought this up. I mean, so I'm actually in the IETF working group for OAuth. So that's one thing. And for sure, they're like the implementations go everywhere. Like people say that they're standard, and they're realistically not even.
Yeah, it's not.
Just and then having to deal with that consequence. There's a lot there. I mean, we've built integrations for our customers in the same exact way, specifically just for the OAuth. So I can imagine. I mean, just way more complex space to actually have to think about the whole API and not just this small little auth piece.
Yeah, the authentication piece is complex enough that there are players in this space, not Prismatic, but other players that see authentication as most of the value that you can provide. And they'll like their connectors are basically just the authentication and then sling whatever you want at it. And for some kinds of problems, that probably is a pretty decent solution. It doesn't, in our view, solve enough of the problem, but
for sure.
It's complex in and of itself.
No, I mean, we actually went there. I mean, that's actually one of the things that we offer in our platform. It's not 150 just because it's not that number.
Yeah.
It's much less than that, but yeah, for sure. No, it wasn't one of the ones that we did recently, but I do remember working for a company where it was for sure a 200 response coming back. And the error, whether or not it was successful or not, was there was a URL in the body which pointed to, I kid you not, a PNG on a website, and the color of a circle or the shape on there would tell you whether or not it was an error. Like sometimes it'd be text, but there's no way you're going to OCR that to figure it out.
That is one I have not seen yet, Warren. So congrats. I think you take the cake on that. Image recognition as error handling is something.
He's laughing. Like I still get, flashbacks to how bad this was. And I'm just like, what do you want us to do? And this was like way after we've already moved to microservices as a company and gone much farther than that. And we still had teams that were building solutions that had this stuff. And it's great to know that in a lot of cases, there's a company out there that would actually just, have to inspect those images for me.
Yeah, I guess that's my lot in life at this point.
So, I mean, you could use like Amazon Mechanical Turk and send the URL to them and have somebody click the URL and then reply back with whether that was a successful response or an error response.
Well, let's take it all the way down. Let's just not even have APIs. We'll just have Mechanical Turk and an Access database, and they can just enter everything.
Absolutely. We need to bring more Microsoft Access back. Is that even still a product?
I honestly don't know. I'm sure. It's one of those, like, it's probably still running power plants somewhere.
Right.
Because that's how that works, right? Like once a thing gets enough ubiquity, it's pretty hard to ever deprecate it for real.
That might be a state secret somewhere that they're actually using, a legacy version of Access database. You should not spill that information. There could be a supply chain attack coming in the future.
Yeah. Sorry, I apparently let it slip.
Yeah, so we are live streaming. So if you were watching the live stream and it suddenly got interrupted, it's because we stumbled across a topic we weren't supposed to talk about.
There you go.
So whenever you're creating the public integrations that you have, what's the process of deciding who you're gonna integrate with?
I mean, I think there's always a lot of nuance to it, but I think just broadly, we're looking for solutions that horizontally serve SaaS companies or are horizontally relevant, I guess, to SaaS companies rather than some specific vertical. So like we could chase, we talked about ag tech before. We could chase the players in ag tech and we could have 150 or 200 connectors just in ag tech if that's what we wanted to do. The problem, of course, with that is, well, now you've built an embedded iPaaS for ag tech, and that's probably not a product that's gonna reach enough critical mass. And so we've always looked for the things that serve horizontally. There are some really obvious ones, like go look at the list of the biggest 30 software companies in the world or SaaS companies in the world, and you're going to find many of them that are on our connector list: Salesforce, right. HubSpot, ServiceNow, the list goes on, Oracle, et cetera, et cetera. I think from there, though, you can kind of take the we want to serve folks horizontally. That doesn't necessarily mean the biggest ones. It sometimes means, in integration heavy submarkets, which ones seem to be the most horizontal, for example. And you end up with things like the sales marketing category or the sales marketing vertical has a huge integration problem, and there are solutions like Segment that basically just do that. They're a little more of an ETL, but it's similar. So we have a bunch of sales and marketing tools, some of which are much smaller than the ServiceNows, et cetera. But because that space is so integration heavy, it makes sense. So I think, we're weighing a bunch of different things, and this is the challenge of being a product manager: is there's never an exact formula to spit out the answer.
I actually
Right.
heard a different thing when you said that, which is if you are planning on building a platform, embedded iPaaS as a service for a specific market, you should consider trying to partner with Prismatic and use it as your fundamental underlayer. Because
Yeah, I
then be generic and go specifically into ag tech or ed tech or sales, etc.
I think there's absolutely a future where a space like ours ends up with people who pull it in. We always talk about it as like pull it into a domain, right? Like customize it for that domain, and then have the prismatic ag tech or whatever. And I think you're right that as platforms like Prismatic get better and better and better at being the guts. But we don't know. I don't know anything about ag tech aside from the tractor conversation we just had a half an hour ago. People who understand those domains really could do interesting things, and we have a couple of partners doing things kind of like that in a couple of spaces. And I expect to see that proliferate.
Although we shouldn't talk about ag tech because I'm totally excited about going and doing that now and just spending my day driving around fields to tractors to reboot them. Like that's a good time waiting to happen for me.
Yeah, there you go.
Want to become a tractor repairman and get the your phone hooked up to the legacy SMS technology and get those messages.
For
you
sure.
may never see another human being the rest as long as you live if that's your path. Like
don't threaten me with a good time.
So not seeing another human may be a pro for some of us. The con is I think we've now waded into the right to repair debate. A huge thing with tractors is they're mostly not repairable now is the way I understand it. They've gotten so technical and such closed walls that I think you basically can't be a tech that just drives around and repairs tractors now, which is quite the hot topic. But I don't know if it passed or didn't pass. I remember the debate. It very well may have passed. I imagine it will take a little while to filter through the industry.
I mean, if you're subscribed to like the ag tech RSS feed, I'm sure you know the answer to that. But I remember the conversation, yeah, and I think that it went that they couldn't stop you from working on your own tractor, but like both of you, I don't know for certain that was the answer.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where the skeptic in me wonders what does that mean in practice, right? Like, I mean, as well as I do, you got a bunch of embedded microcontrollers on a tractor with a bunch of like C or Rust or something built on them 15 years ago. Okay, so I can open the panel and poke at it, but what, like, do I have a JTAG programmer for this thing? Like, it seems like a stretch as technical as they've gotten.
I mean, the old ones I think are easier. You can try to find on eBay some part that replaces that exact thing and you throw it in there. I think the new ones are really the problematic. They're so well integrated that even if you have the right to do it, there's no expert out there outside of the company who actually even understands what that is. And have you tried to go through manuals on like how Windows 95 was actually built and like read through that? I mean, I'm sure some people have gone through that and be like, I know every single bit that's here and would be able to understand it, but it's its own sort of problematic situation to be in to try to fix a complicated machine.
100%.
Yeah, and from that perspective, I can understand the manufacturer's desire to I don't feel like it's a protection thing. It's like maybe a self-preservation thing because they know what's going to happen is somebody's going to open it up, upload some ROM that they got off of Pirate Bay on there. It's going to brick it, and then they've got to do a warranty repair on this thing.
I think part of it is definitely a moat around exposing it. I know part of it's definitely IP where if you expose that, there will be 10 other companies who build that exact same thing, who promise that they can connect to the ag tech network automatically and work exactly the same. So I can imagine like all of the things happening here. I'm on the opposite side for sure, though. I prefer open. I think there's a lot more benefit that comes from it. I think we're building platforms here. We tend to believe that in general. You don't have a competitive advantage just because you built it first, right? It has to fundamentally be better. And having customers or users out there that are pushing you to get better is for sure a better direction to go in.
Yeah.
It almost feels like they're still in the an environment similar to what we were in the 90s, where closed loop competitive agreements and intellectual property was the defining factor in your business, not how much value you actually provided to your customers.
Oh, we're going to get this all loop back around. And in order to
Right.
do it today and deliver value, you need to have the most number of integrations.
Right?
There you go. Full circle. Warren, you're a genius. You're a podcast genius.
Oh,
So what does the future of Prismatic look like?
Yeah, I think we started with a really simple plan, which was we're going to build a thing that makes what we just finished doing at Old Company not insane. When I left there, sold it to a big investor. We had about 100 folks in our engineering team, and about half of our resources were on integrations. There's like no CEO or product manager or anybody really who wants to see that on a slide and think like, yeah, that feels right. And so we started out just to say we're gonna solve as much of that problem as we can, and we didn't even start with a real opinion about what shape that solution would take. And that was 5 years ago now. We built an early product, iterated with customers. We're now scaling the business and are growing pretty quickly. And through that, I think our viewpoint on what shape that solution takes has continued to evolve. I think as you get more customers, I think as the category evolves. I mean, our category didn't even have a name until about 3 years ago. So it's certainly a fast-moving place. I think some of our original ideas about what was important have turned out to be less important, and vice versa. I think we will just continue iterating on that core belief that there has to be a solution to let software companies connect their products to the other products their customers use as easy as possible. And I think we're mostly agnostic about the shape of that solution. I think we're mostly agnostic about whether it's more code or more low code or both, or we see so many companies that get really opinionated about that. And we certainly have opinions about where different pieces of the solution make sense. But I think to some extent, we're just looking for a solution. We're just iterating toward a solution, and we're pretty willing to take that wherever it goes. And so I expect for the next few years, we're going to keep with exactly that same mindset. We're going to keep building fast. We're going to keep working closely with customers. We're going to keep, iterating on the code native side, iterating on the low code side, continuing to scale the infrastructure because we keep getting bigger customers that keep inventing new ways to do crazy things with integrations. And I think all of that in and of itself is going to keep us really busy. So as long as all of that keeps serving customers better every day, or at least every week, I think we'll absolutely be doing that.
I think you did something genius here, actually. And to go even a little bit further, is that companies have engineers on staff called integration engineer, or sometimes they're in the customer success role. So I can imagine as long as people are hiring for that position, they're not necessarily utilizing this great resource that's out there instead, right? Instead of hiring an engineer, it's probably a lot cheaper to even go out and a lot faster to integrate Prismatic in the long term.
Yeah, and a lot of the actual end users in the SaaS business of Prismatic are integration engineers or integration specialists, or they have a million different titles. But you're exactly right. We're a platform that can, to a large extent, enable those teams independently, so that they're not as reliant on DevOps, for example. They're not as reliant on core developers, for example. And they have a platform that's kind of like their sandbox to go build their stuff in. And that has worked extremely well. We can provide a huge amount of leverage and therefore a huge amount of value for those teams. And sometimes let those teams get structured in different ways where, you'll hire for a different profile than you otherwise would, because it turns out they don't need to manage a Kubernetes cluster to deploy integrations. And you can instead focus on more domain expertise or more API expertise or things like that.
I like to hear that you're sticking with your core value proposition, because that's one of the things that, I've spent almost my entire career working with startups, and that's always been the big struggle, is for those that actually make it to the part where they know what their core value is after achieving a moderate level of success there, they tend to wander off somewhere else and do something else. And MyFitnessPal is my favorite example of this, because, when they got started, it was all about just tracking your food, put in your food and it gave you the stuff there. And they were hugely successful at that. But today, if you open the MyFitnessPal app, you have to navigate through 3 different screens before you get to the to the
Oh, wow.
screen where you do the core thing that they do. So I'm excited
Yeah.
to hear that you're sticking with that, and that you're not, you haven't gotten shiny object syndrome and have gone off to chase something else.
Yeah, I think there are rational reasons at some scale to start diversifying a product line. I mean, at some point, you've saturated a market, for example, and if you're going to keep growing, you have to, somehow diversify. When your target market is what Prismatic's target market is, which is essentially all software businesses worldwide, there is no risk of saturating that market anytime soon, right? So, I think we know this is something that we set out to do. We know that we're good at it. We know that we've thought really hard about it for years and years and years. Why would we spend our time on anything else? I think is basically the way that we see it here. And I think we will just keep doubling down on that and keep serving a bigger and bigger chunk of that market every day.
It actually reminds me of a totally different vertical here in the mutual fund and investment world, finance.
Okay.
There's a writer, investor, Stephen Lynch, who has a book, One Up on Wall Street, and he calls it value-based investing. But he actually coined a term here to mean that the investors go out and they start to do extra things, or the companies that they're focused on actually do these things. He coined it diversification. So
Okay.
you're diversifying what you're doing, but you're not good at that next thing. You're not good at the next step. So you're really just making your whole portfolio worse in a way.
I see you trying, but you're just not good at it.
Well, it's so hard to be good at one thing. Think how hard it is to be good at four things.
Right.
Especially before you're at a scale where you can, bring in people to do some of that. And, I would argue that scale is pretty good sized.
Yeah, I mean, that's a standard founder mistake, I think, that, we were survivorship bias, right? We were good one time. If we just do the same thing again, we'll be successful a second time with a new thing. Realistically, it doesn't work that way. You got lucky, maybe. You had help, you had backing, right? You had money to do it. Your network was perfectly aligned for whatever that is that made it happen. That's likely not true the second time around. So, like Will said, it's great to hear, that the focus is there.
I'm acutely dialed into the second founder thing. I, had a pretty good exit last time and was too young to retire. So I did this, but I went into this thinking oh my gosh, I mean, so many things had to go right. I can look back over the 16 years of my first thing and see all of the stars and moons that had to align to make that happen. What are the chances that happens, again? And, what you realize is it's going to be a very different path and it's going to, whatever. But I was terrified starting Prismatic that you had one good run and now you decided to just do it one too many times and this one blows up in your face.
Right.
You waste a bunch of years, but it's gone okay. So I'm feeling better about it every day.
And there's that paranoia that karma is going to go, look, we cut you some slack and now you're pushing your luck. We got to put you in your place. And then go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Will.
I was going to say there's pressure there, because when you're a solo founder, whatever, it's just me. But then you start adding employees and and so now you have your employees' kids are essentially your kids because you're on the hook for making sure that they get provided for. And that weighs heavily on your mind.
Yeah, definitely something you notice along the way. I remember I early in my career, and the last thing is we got to a decent size and it was a lot of young folks at the time, and they all started having kids and buying houses because that's what you do when you're, in your late 20s or early 30s or whatever, and things are going well. And I suddenly realized oh my gosh, the amount of capital outlay happening, far flung from this organization is kind of terrifying. We better not screw this up at this point. And that stuck in my brain for a long time I was probably 24 or something at the time. And that was a grow up quick moment for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah. You're I'm 24 and have 15 mortgages.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So from a technical perspective, whenever we talk about integrations, my mind instantly goes to calling HTTP APIs and getting a payload. Hopefully it's a JSON payload. Is there a common pattern, or have you done enough of these where you have like just, I guess, just some general advice on things about APIs or integrations that were surprising?
I mean, I don't know that I was even surprised by this because I'd seen enough pain along the way in my previous journey, but like there is everything in the world is out there. There are still SOAP APIs. There are still SOAP APIs in giant applications, that are really important applications that run the world. And, there are plenty of REST APIs that don't give you JSON. Now, there are, of course, some that do, but there are plenty that don't. There are also plenty of integrations that don't have anything to do with HTTP APIs. It's like we're going to take a flat file and we're going to put it in an SFTP share somewhere. And we all laugh about that, and it does feel very antiquated, but like the huge amount of the world is run on things like that. And, I think companies that really want to do integrations well can't just decide they're only going to integrate with things that happen to have the most modern, most palatable API. I think instead you have to think about it from a customer perspective. And like, I don't care how we do it. What I know is that we need to do this for our customer. And if that means like reading some crazy, flat file that's fixed width and, sticking it on an SFTP share somewhere, then that's what we're going to do. There are also plenty of integrations that, although many of the solutions may be in the cloud, some place that data has to end up is not in the cloud. It's behind a firewall in a data center somewhere, or maybe behind a firewall even if it's in a cloud, it's like for some reason cordoned off from the public internet. And so, something that Prismatic released relatively recently is on-premise agent, where you can run inside, in Docker, you can run inside your environment something that will remote tunnel to Prismatic, such that we can dump a flat file to your file share inside the thing, or maybe talk to an API that happens to be private and behind a firewall. So I think the diversity of these things is way more than most people give it credit for. We all think about the, name hot SaaS app here that has a really cool GraphQL API. That's what we think APIs are. The reality is some APIs or, APIs that maybe don't even meet the definition technically, were invented 20, 30 years ago and are still really important parts of the world. So I think being flexible and finding tooling that lets you be flexible is maybe the advice I would give.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked that because, I spend so much time in new tech startups that I just naturally think of JSON APIs or GraphQL or whatever. And you've got a great point, like some of these legacy companies, their footprint and their infrastructure is just so massive that I'm sure they would like to upgrade to something newer too, but the level of effort to do so is just cost prohibitive, especially if what they currently have is working.
And that is the truth of it. And I mean, this is not always the most popular opinion among technical folks, but like some of this stuff has worked for 30 years. I don't know that we really want to swap it out for a new thing. Like, there kind of has to be this like barrier you cross for the things that you might get if the new thing works out well before you're willing to take on the risk of a new thing. And do we all snicker and laugh at the flat file that gets put on an SFTP share every 15 minutes around the clock that happens to run some mission critical thing at a power plant or whatever? Yes, we all snicker about that. Has it worked basically nonstop for 30 years? Yes.
So more than I can say.
Yeah, exactly. So like there are obviously really complex things to weigh there. And, obviously everybody's slowly modernizing. That will go on forever, I imagine, in technology. And so this stuff won't exist forever. But you aren't going to get, somebody to move that overnight because you thought it would be nicer if they had a GraphQL API. It is that is not how the world works. And so I think again, flexibility is really important.
Yeah, for sure. Warren, do you see that a lot with the authentication and authorization space?
I didn't know which way to go with this, honestly, because I worked in a place where we were shipping around like gigabyte large doc files for customized manufacturing. And so like, yeah, for sure. Anyone who's like, we were REST all the way until it got to this file. And then you're not basic C4ing that and shipping it over an API. Like, I'm just going to laugh at you. I mean, realistically, how are you getting 5 gigs over the internet like that? For sure, you're compressing it. It's some binary format and being sent like that. But on the auth side, absolutely for sure. Like even these providers that say they're OAuth 2 compatible, they'll support XML and other ones. I mean, AWS, for instance, is a good example. Until recently, I think all their APIs were still fundamentally XML based. I mean, the SDKs, of course, handle it appropriately, but they were XML requests. And that's still fairly common. Actually, interestingly enough, the default standard for OAuth 2, because of the legacy of how the internet was built, supports URL encoded, a www URL encoded format, not JSON by default. So that's the primary one that we have to support. I mean, by default, we do JSON just because it looks nicer for everyone in debugging. But we get a lot of weird behavior. Like if you don't specify the accept header, sometimes the docs will say, hey, we're XML, but the result will be some nonsensical other thing. So there is a lot of undefined behavior when not requesting explicit things. And a part of it is, unfortunately, the legacy world that we're still using. Yes, the internet is part of that legacy, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with the consequences of that. I don't know if I have any particularly good stories because we're not shipping along a lot of data. But if you think anything related to OAuth or OpenID is bad, like just take a look at the guts of how SAML works. I mean, this is security over XML, and this is, I mean, it's not the most shocking thing ever, but it gives you a good understanding that like literally every SaaS company out there that offers SSO as an option is doing XML in some way, and you're not going to get away from that.
Yeah, I think that's right. The other thing I always think about is like, we talk about XML as this legacy thing, which at this point it is. 15 years ago, it was the hot fangled whatever, right? And so like, I think what is often lost on us is we're building legacy tech right now. And in 10 or 15 years, we're going to dislike what we're building right now. Like that has proven to be true since the beginning of computing. So I don't know why it wouldn't continue from here. There is always going to be legacy stuff. And I think, a key belief at Prismatic is that's the real world, and we live in the real world. We're not making the nicest platform to make a really cool blog post to show that in 2 minutes you can connect this to this and move on with your life, because that isn't the real world. The real world is all of this complexity and all of this depth and 5 gigabyte doc files, and because whether we like it or not, that's the real world.
So the next time you're having a bad day, that's a thought to keep in mind. Just remember that if you're really lucky, 10 years from now, someone's going to be looking at this code you're writing, bitching about how it's legacy.
Yep. They're going to be talking about this stupid GraphQL thing where like it's just, I don't know what we'll do instead, but like GraphQL will be chopped liver. It'll be the worst thing ever. And we'll all make fun of it.
I'm sure the answer is there is going to be some sort of LLM involved there. And
I suppose that is true.
I don't know if I'm okay for that future yet.
It's going to be an LLM writing it back to an Access database.
So at the bottom, it's always an Access database. That's my new life. That's my new life theory.
Awesome. What else should we talk about for integrations, Prismatic, future goals?
I think we covered a lot of things. It's been really interesting to be at the beginning of a category. This certainly isn't the first time that any company has tried to build a tool to help companies provide native integrations. There have been kind of like several generations in the past of this, but none of them really got to critical mass in any way. And I think, we believed when we started this, and I believe, tenfold that today, that like the time is right for this category and these solutions. And so it's been interesting to watch like what didn't go right in some of the previous iterations of this 10 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever. Why is now the time? And then just watching what it looks like when you start in a space and you don't know who your competitors are because they're not calling it the same thing you're calling it. Right. Eventually, people kind of like consolidate around a name. In the case of our category, G2 kind of like helped firm that up by deciding to call it embedded iPaaS. And several of us were using that term, and then they used it and everybody kind of globbed on. But like just watching from like goo, watching a category get firmed up has been really interesting, and very different than my last experience. We were a disruptor in an industry that had been around since the 70s. There was no category to be formed there. We were like a better tool, we believed, but like we weren't generating a new space, and that's very much what's happening here. And I think software companies, SaaS companies, and developers are well served to pay attention to the category. Like even if there's some completely rational reason to keep this stuff in house for now, I think it's a category that is moving so fast and getting so much better all the time, Prismatic included in that I think we're seeing more and more people decide what people decided with authentication 10 years ago, which is like, can I build this? Yes. Do I want to build this, or is it the highest and best use? Probably not. I should probably focus on my core domain instead, right? And I think the same exact thing is happening in the integration space. And it's been fascinating to watch. I also think it's going to have a big impact on software companies, because I think everything you can do to focus more of your energy, more of your R&D energy on core product, the more of that you can do, the better you're going to serve your customers. And I think in a little way, this integration platform space, embedded integration platform space, is a way to do that. And I think software, because of this and a million other things, is just going to keep getting better and better and better at serving customers in their own niche and their own narrow verticals better and better all the time.
For sure. What was the first integration you built for Prismatic? Do you remember?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably Salesforce, which to this day is our most used connector. I mean, I think last I heard they had 10% of the revenue in SaaS worldwide. So like that's a pretty major player, obviously. But some of the earliest ones that we watched our customers build and go to production were things that like I literally don't remember the name of. It was crazy ERPs in vertical markets. It was sales tools in big enterprisey stuff that were really important to our customers' customers, and therefore were important to our customers. And really early on, we had validated this idea that like it is one thing to have a marketplace or a library of connectors. We are never going to have the 30,000 you have to have. And since then, I've just been amazed at the kinds of things that our customers connect to, because that's what their customers need. And I think that's what's often lost in these conversations, or lost in the in the TechCrunch article talking about whatever, is the like, yes, it is neat that in the sales marketing space, if you build 100 connectors, you can connect some large percentage of that ecosystem. But the long tail is where customers are actually well served, and software companies have to serve their customers well, and that means the long tail. And I think as not sexy as it is, to some extent, Prismatic is a tool that serves the horizontal stuff really well out of the box. But we have spent a lot of time getting really good at helping our customers in the long tail. And that isn't sexy. It's not what anybody wants to hear or talk about. But I can tell you, it's what makes tools at the end of the day serve their customers the best.
Sure, yeah, and I agree with you. I think we should probably make a decision-based effort to talk about that more, because that is important to keep in mind in technology. That the technology is cool, and that's why a lot of us are here.
Yep,
is because
100%.
we geek out on that. But you've got to do something that generates value along the way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And fortunately, customers are pretty good at reminding us all of that, and product managers are usually pretty good at consolidating that and communicating it. And so, I think good software companies have a million ways to hear that feedback and respond to it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all that matters is how we're serving customers. Everything else is just the path.
Right on. Cool. Well, should we move on to some picks?
Let's do it.
All right, on. All right, picking on you, Warren. What you got?
Yeah, today I'm going to go with the book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. And I absolutely love this book. I think this was one of the first ones when I decided that maybe I can be a leader too. I picked up and read, and I wouldn't have expected that it would have been that interesting for me, but there have been some that were really cornerstone to how I think about leadership now. Things like the law of succession and the law of incomplete data. I love to think that I'm only going to be successful as a leader if I can point to someone and say, that person will replace me when I leave. And honestly, every organization I've been to since reading that, I keep looking at this and be like, where is your replacement? Where is your replacement? Everywhere. And that was my thought when I joined this podcast. Will's just looking for his long-term replacement.
Absolutely. It's like the Roman Senate. Somebody's going to stick a knife in my back sooner or later.
Oh, hopefully it won't be like that. Will.
I can't wait to hear 6 months from now that Warren has stabbed Will and taken the podcast.
Right.
We don't even live in the same country.
Right.
Fair enough.
Awesome. Michael, what'd you bring for a pick?
So there's a company called McMaster Car and an associated catalog that is just like the coolest thing ever for anybody who's ever made anything physical. And I think it's not known enough about. It's anybody who has a shop or a commercial shop or whatever is going to have a McMaster Car, those big yellow catalogs somewhere. But I think more of the world needs to know about McMaster Car. So go to their website. It's like the rare catalog that is as educational as it is a catalog. You can go to the section on like leveling feet for a table, looking to my right here, and they will explain to you all the different kinds of leveling feet and the different ways they articulate and the different kinds of materials and the advantages of that. And then they will show you all the ones you can buy, and they have absolutely everything under the sun. It's just the coolest thing for anybody who makes anything.
So do they still ship the physical catalog?
Only to people who get to like a certain amount of spend.
Okay.
And it's kind of become this cult thing where like it's kind of unknown what the algorithm is to get yourself a catalog. But they resell on eBay. So when people every year they put out a new catalog and it has this big green number on the front. They're on like 130 something or 140 something or whatever. And every year it's a new one, or maybe it's even more often than that. And so the people who always get a new one will put the old one on eBay, and they sometimes sell for like $50 or $100 because it's kind of become a status symbol to like have a McMaster Car catalog. They managed to make their catalog like an elite scarcity thing. That is some branding right there.
Right. And there's something about having the physical catalog that is so satisfying. Like this is an experience that you can't get from a website. Having that catalog and just flipping through it, and finding what you need and reading up on it. Like that's a tactile experience that can't be replicated. And McMaster Car has definitely nailed that.
They've absolutely nailed it. They also have about the lowest friction ordering experience that I've ever seen. And I'm including Amazon in that, which has a very low friction ordering experience.
Yeah.
Like it just magically shows up, and they don't ever show you. They at least unless this has changed recently, they don't show you shipping costs. They don't calculate shipping. It just costs exactly what it costs to ship it to you, and everything ships 2 day. I think you can get 1 day, but nothing ships slower than 2 day. And they just you just push the button, and then 2 days later it's at your door, no matter what. And you get this little invoice, and it's just like all handled on the back end. It's definitely set up for commercial use, but
right.
It's just the coolest company.
Yeah, good call. I hadn't thought about them in quite a long time, but as soon as you said the name, like the memories just came flooding back.
Not always the cheapest place to get things, but you can find anything, anytime, and get it 2 days later, which is just pretty awesome.
Yeah, and based on my experience with them in the past, like you can depend on what you order from them as well.
Yeah, I think their entire brand is built on it's going to be of the highest quality. It's going to be what you wanted. We're going to educate you to make sure you get the right thing. Yep. I've never had a problem with them.
Awesome. Dang, that's going to be a hard pick to top because that just brought back a flood of memories for me. But my pick is also going way back. I'm going to pick, for those of you who may not know, there's a band called Led Zeppelin that was started in the 60s, popular in the 70s, up into the 80s, really key to defining heavy metal as we know it. But like the songs that they did are not what you would think of when it comes to heavy metal. But go check out Led Zeppelin, The Immigrant Song. And if you've seen Shrek 3, you've already heard this song because it's the song used when Snow White unleashes the animals to attack in the movie Shrek 3. And the only reason I know all of this is because I was scrolling through YouTube one day, a couple days ago, and there was this video, a vocalist coach reacts to Led Zeppelin. And it's this whole genre of YouTube videos where people listen to music that's outside of their expertise. And so this lady who's a professional opera singer was going to evaluate Robert Plant, the singer of Led Zeppelin, his vocals in this song, Immigrant Song. And the song starts and she immediately stops. She's like, wait, I've heard this before. And then goes and finds the YouTube video from Shrek 3 where Snow White is singing the song. And she was blown away because she thought that the song was written for Shrek 3, not realizing that it
Okay.
was a Led Zeppelin song from the 70s. So that's my pick.
I love it.
Yeah, good times. Well, man, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a really cool chat, fascinating, brought back some old memories.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been so much fun. Warren, thanks again for joining me on the show.
Yeah, of course.
And then to all the listeners out there, thank you all for listening. Appreciate you being there. And we will see everyone next week.
Thanks, everybody.